My name is Jack, and I live in this bustling city that is also a little absurd. Every day is uneventful, with work and family being the two constants in my life, just like countless ordinary people whose edges have been smoothed by life. My wife Amy is the only bright spot in my life and the unadulterated beauty in my heart. She has long, silky, golden hair that shimmers with an enchanting radiance in the sunlight, as if it were a gift from the sun god Apollo. Whenever she gently shakes her hair, the faint scent of lavender lingers on the tip of my nose, intoxicating me. Her eyes are a deep, turquoise blue like the Mediterranean Sea, like two bottomless lakes, hiding countless secrets and stories. When she looks at me, her gaze seems to pierce my soul, making me want to tell her all my thoughts. Beneath her high, straight nose are full, rosy lips, like ripe cherries, exuding an alluring fragrance. And her figure is so hot that it's hard to take your eyes off her. Her slender waist is so small that it looks like it could break if you bend it lightly, but it also has a sense of strength. Her plump buttocks and waist form a perfect curve, and every step she takes is like a seductive dance. When she wears a tight-fitting dress, her curvy figure is displayed to the fullest, always attracting countless envious and jealous glances. That evening, I dragged my tired body home. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Amy excitedly running towards me. Her eyes were shining with a strange light, like a little girl who had received a gift she liked. "Jack, look at this." She handed me an invitation. I took the invitation, which had the words "Zombie Carnival" written in a strange font, surrounded by some fongy zombie drawings. I frowned, a sense of unease rising in my heart. "Zombie Carnival? What is this?" I asked. Amy explained excitedly. "It's a really popular event these days. Everyone dresses up as a zombie and has a party in an abandoned factory. I heard it's really interesting. I received an invitation. Let's go together." Looking at her expectant eyes, my worries were somewhat dispelled. Although I wasn't interested in this kind of activity, I nodded in agreement to make Amy happy. However, I didn't expect that this seemingly simple agreement would plunge our lives into an unprecedented chaos and depravity. The zombie carnival was like a Pandora's box, slowly opening to release endless darkness and the unknown. Finally, the day of the zombie carnival arrived. Amy and I got all dressed up and set off for the abandoned factory. All the way there, I was constantly feeling uneasy, and I always felt that there was an indescribable strangeness about this event. Amy, however, was excited like a child, chattering non-stop the whole way, her eyes full of anticipation. When we arrived at the abandoned factory, night had already fallen. Dim lights shone through the factory windows, like strange eyes, coldly watching everyone who arrived. Outside the factory, there were already quite a few people gathered, all of them wearing ragged zombie costumes, with terrifying makeup on their faces, some with realistic blood stains on their faces, and emitting low growls from their mouths, as if they had really turned into zombies. Amy was wearing a black low-cut short dress, and her fair skin looked particularly dazzling in the night. Her long hair was casually draped over her shoulders, and she had applied some simple zombie makeup to match the theme, but it did not in the least hide her beauty, but instead added a few different kinds of charm. Her figure was accentuated by the short skirt, and with every step, her plump buttocks swayed gently, attracting the attention of many zombie cosplayers. We walked into the factory, and the sight inside was even more eerie. The dim lights flickered uncertainly, as if they would go out at any moment. The air was filled with a pungent smell, a mixture of rotting flesh and cheap perfume. The music was deafening, but it had a creepy rhythm that seemed to come from the depths of hell. The zombies were writhing and twisting on the dance floor, their movements twisted and grotesque. Some were pulling at each other, while others were screaming at each other. Amy excitedly took my hand, wanting to get into the crazy atmosphere. I held her hand tightly, afraid of losing her in the chaotic crowd. We struggled through the crowd, occasionally receiving strange looks from the zombies around us. Some of those looks were envious, some greedy, and some had an indescribable lust. I could feel Amy's beauty in this world of zombies, like a piece of tempting fresh meat, attracting countless looks. My unease grew stronger and stronger, and I always felt that something bad was about to happen. I tried to persuade Amy to leave, but she was having so much fun that she didn't want to listen to me. She broke free from my hands and plunged into the middle of the dance floor, dancing wildly with the zombies. Watching her excitedly, I sighed helplessly and could only follow her closely, vigilantly observing everything around us. However, I had no idea that behind the strange atmosphere, there was a huge conspiracy, and we had already unknowingly fallen into the whirlpool of this conspiracy. In this zombie carnival factory full of a strange atmosphere, I followed Amy closely, not daring to take my eyes off her for a moment. The surrounding zombies seemed to be driven by some kind of crazy force, rampaging through the narrow space, and occasionally emitting creepy screams. Amy danced to her heart's content on the dance floor, her curvy figure twisting to the rhythm of the music, her face beaming with a smile of ecstasy. Her long hair flew wildly in the air, and her black low-cut short skirt shimmered with a mysterious luster in the dim lighting. The zombies around her locked their hungry gazes on her, and the heat in their eyes made me feel a strong sense of unease. I tried to weave my way through the crowd to get closer to Amy, but the surging crowd pushed me away again and again like an invisible wall. Suddenly, a large zombie-costumed person staggered towards me, and I was unable to avoid him, so I was knocked over. I stumbled back a few steps and nearly fell to the ground. When I had regained my balance and looked for Amy again, she had disappeared between the gaps in the crowd. My heart tightened, and a sense of panic quickly spread. I shouted Amy's name, but my voice was drowned out by the deafening music and the zombies' roars. I began frantically searching the crowd, my eyes scanning every corner, not missing a single possible figure. I frantically searched around the dance floor, with sweat constantly dripping from my forehead and soaking my back. The zombies around me were still immersed in their own crazy world, oblivious to my anxiety. I pushed the zombies in front of me away, ignoring their angry hissing, with only one thought in my mind: find Amy. I searched every corner of the dance floor, but I never found Amy. I went to a corner of the factory, where it was relatively quiet, but the dim lighting greatly limited my vision. I panted heavily, and my anxiety and worry grew stronger and stronger. Just when I was almost desperate, I suddenly heard a familiar laugh, a laugh that carried a touch of indulgence and joy, and it was Amy's voice. I was overjoyed and immediately ran in the direction of the laughter. In a corner full of miscellaneous objects, I saw a vague figure. As I got closer, I realized it was Amy. She was standing with a few zombie dress-up players, with a big smile on her face, as if she was happily talking to them. A stone finally fell from my heart, but at the same time, an inexplicable sense of jealousy and worry welled up in my heart. I don't know what she has been through during the time I have been separated from her, and what these zombie dress-up people have done to her. However, before I could ask, Amy seemed to sense my arrival. She turned her head and looked at me, her eyes flashing with panic, but quickly returning to normal. I looked at her, my heart full of doubts and unease. This unexpected separation at the zombie carnival seemed to be just the beginning, and more unknowns and dangers awaited us. I stood still, my gaze fixed on Amy, my mind flooded with questions. The flash of panic in her eyes just now was like a sharp thorn, piercing my heart. I walked slowly towards her, my footsteps heavy and slow. Each step felt like I was stepping on my own heartbeat. As I got closer, the zombie-costumed people also noticed me. They looked at me with a hint of provocation and disdain in their eyes, as if I were an intruder who had interrupted their happy hour. Amy's smile froze on her face, and she looked away, afraid to make eye contact. "Amy, what are you guys doing?" I tried to make my voice sound calm, but I couldn't help but tremble a little. Amy opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but was interrupted by a zombie-costumed person standing next to her. "Hey man, don't be so uptight. We're just having a chat. Look at your wife, having a great time," said the zombie-costumed person in a creepy voice. His face painted with scary makeup, his mouth wide open, revealing a mouthful of uneven teeth, a creepy smile. I ignored him and just stared at Amy, waiting for her explanation. Amy's face turned slightly pale. After a moment of hesitation, She said, "Jack, we were just chatting. Everyone here is very interesting." Her voice sounded a bit forced, and she no longer had her usual confidence and composure. At that moment, I suddenly noticed that the zombie dresser's hand was unceremoniously placed on Amy's waist, gently squeezing. Amy's body trembled slightly, but she did not move away. My anger instantly welled up, and I felt my reason being consumed little by little. "What are you doing? Take your hands off!" I roared, rushing forward and pulling the zombie dresser's hand away from Amy's waist. The zombie-costumed man was enraged by my sudden action. He glared at me viciously and let out a low growl. "You guys, don't ruin our fun." Amy saw this scene and her face showed a look of horror. She quickly stood between us, trying to stop us from clashing. "Jack, don't. He's just joking." I looked at Amy, my eyes full of disappointment and anger. "Joking? Do you think this is a joke?" The zombies around us heard our quarrel and gathered around, their eyes full of excitement and anticipation, as if they were waiting for a good show. I looked at these zombies and a feeling of despair and helplessness welled up in my heart. In this crazy zombie carnival, I felt like an outsider, while Amy seemed to have fully integrated into this crazy world. I looked at Amy, and her eyes expressed both guilt towards me and reluctance to leave this carnival. I suddenly felt that the woman in front of me had become so unfamiliar. I didn't know what had happened to her, nor did I know what kind of shocking discoveries and disasters this carnival would bring us. And where would our relationship go from here? The tension around us was rising. The zombies were staring at us, as if they were expecting a fierce conflict. The zombie dresser and I were glaring at each other, the tension between us almost palpable. Amy stood between us, trembling slightly and her eyes full of panic. "Jack, calm down. Don't be impulsive." Amy's voice was full of tears, her hands waving in front of her, trying to defuse the tense situation. But at that moment, I was filled with anger and unwillingness, and I simply couldn't calm down. "How can you expect me to calm down? Look at what he was just like, and you're still defending him," I shouted at the top of my lungs, my voice echoing through the noisy factory. The zombie dress-up man was unafraid, however, and instead he took a provocative step closer to me. He exuded a pungent smell, a mixture of cheap alcohol and rotting flesh. "What, do you want to fight? You won't get anywhere here." The zombie-costumed man sneered, his eyes full of contempt. The surrounding zombies also began to stir, emitting low growls as if to cheer him on. Just then, something unexpected happened. Amy reached out and grabbed the zombie-costumed man's arm, pulling him behind her, her eyes full of concern. "Stop fighting. It's all a misunderstanding." Her voice was soft, but it hit my heart like a sledgehammer. My mind went blank, unable to believe what I was seeing. "Amy, what are you doing?" I asked, trembling with despair. Amy bit her lip, a resolute look in her eyes. Without answering my question, she turned to face the zombie-costumed man, and a gentle smile spread across her face that I had never seen before. "Don't pay him any mind. Let's just continue playing," Amy whispered, her voice as if it came from another world, so unfamiliar. Her hand gently rested on the zombie's shoulder, and her body unconsciously moved closer to him. I felt my world completely collapse. The wife I once loved was now so intimate with a zombie in front of me. I wanted to rush up to them and separate them, but my feet were like nailed to the ground, unable to move an inch. The zombies around them burst out laughing, their laughter harsh and unpleasant. I watched Amy and the zombie cosplayer gradually blend into the dance floor, their figures intertwined in the dim light, their movements becoming more and more intimate. Amy's head rested on the zombie cosplayer's chest, her face beaming with a contented smile, as if she had completely forgotten about me. Tears blurred my vision. The pain and anger in my heart intertwined and turned into a raging flame. I vowed in my heart that I would find out the truth of this matter, and no matter what the cost, I would get Amy back and return our lives to normal. But I knew that this would no longer be simple. This crazy affair had pushed our lives to the brink. I stood there, watching Amy and the zombie dress-up character wildly making out on the dance floor, and the pain in my heart overwhelmed me like a raging tide. The jeering laughter of the zombies around us was like a sharp blade, constantly piercing my heart. I clenched my fists, my fingernails sinking deep into my palms, but I couldn't feel any pain, because the torment in my heart had long since numbed me. Just as I was completely overwhelmed by despair, Amy suddenly stopped dancing. She gently pushed away the zombie-costumed person and slowly walked towards me. Her steps were a little unsteady, and there seemed to be a hint of guilt and hesitation in her eyes. I looked at her, my heart full of confusion and anger, not knowing what kind of trick she was going to play. "Jack, don't be angry. I was just joking with you." Amy's voice trembled a little as she tried to force a smile, but it looked even more miserable than crying. I glared at her without saying a word, waiting for her to continue explaining. "This was all a prank, planned by me and my friends, just to see your reaction," Amy said hastily, her eyes full of expectation, as if she hoped I would believe her. I looked at her, and the anger in my heart flared up again. "Prank? You think this is a prank? Do you know that my heart was just broken?" I yelled, my voice full of unspeakable pain. Amy's face turned pale, and she lowered her head, afraid to look at me again. At that moment, the zombie-costumed person also walked over, removed the mask from his face, and revealed a young face. He looked at me with some embarrassment, scratched his head, and said, "Brother, I'm really sorry. This is just a joke. Don't take it personally." I looked at the two of them and my doubts remained. Although they said it was a prank, Amy's performance just now was so realistic that I couldn't easily believe it. Just as I was about to continue questioning them, I noticed that Amy and the zombie-costumed person exchanged a meaningful glance. That glance seemed to hide a deeper secret, and it was definitely not a simple prank. I was shocked and realized that things were far from what they said. Maybe this so-called prank was just a cover-up for a bigger conspiracy. I decided not to be fooled by their sweet talk anymore and must find out the truth myself. "Okay, I'll believe it's a prank for now, but I hope you won't pull this kind of nonsense again." I tried to sound calm, despite the anger I felt. Amy and the zombie look-alike both let out a sigh of relief, their faces showing signs of relief. What they didn't know was that I had secretly made up my mind to keep a close eye on their every move. This so-called prank had already made me deeply suspicious of Amy, and I would never allow myself to be kept in the dark. I had to uncover the truth behind it, no matter how cruel that truth might be. And in this eerie zombie carnival, I knew that a real battle had just begun. The zombie carnival finally came to an end, and Amy and I set off home together. The atmosphere along the way was extremely oppressive, as if the air had frozen. Amy tried several times to break the silence, but I stopped her with a cold stare. The image of her getting close to the zombie dresser kept playing back in my mind, and the memory of that needle-like pain made me doubt everything she said. After returning home, Amy seemed like a different person, always distracted. She frequently checked her phone, and every now and then she would receive some message, and her expression would change accordingly. Every time I asked, she would mumble that it was a message from a friend, but the way she was evasive only deepened my suspicions. One day, I came home early from work, intending to surprise Amy, but instead I witnessed a shocking scene. She was whispering with the zombie cosplayer in the living room, both of them looking very nervous. When they saw me suddenly appear, they stopped talking like startled rabbits, their faces full of panic. "What are you doing?" I asked coldly, my voice tinged with a hint of chill. Amy's lips trembled slightly as she tried to force a smile. "Jack, he just came to return something to me." The zombie cosplayer also nodded hastily, but dared not meet my eyes. I ignored their explanations and walked straight towards them. I could sense that they were hiding something from me. "Don't lie to me, Amy. What are you two plotting?" I demanded, keeping my gaze fixed on her. Amy's face turned pale. She bit her lip and finally said, "Jack, I really can't tell you. Just don't ask. Okay?" Her voice carried a hint of pleading, but I was unmoved. Seeing this, the zombie dresser suddenly stood up and tried to get in front of Amy. "Buddy, don't make things difficult for her. This has nothing to do with her. I looked at him, and the anger in my heart flared up again. It has nothing to do with her? Then tell me, what's going on? Just then, my phone suddenly rang, from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, but then picked it up. A low, eerie voice came from the other end of the line. Don't pursue this any further, or you'll regret it. With that, the person on the other end hung up. My hand holding the phone trembled slightly, and a strong sense of unease welled up in my heart. I looked at Amy and the zombie-costumed person in front of me, and realized that I was in the midst of a huge crisis. Behind this so-called prank seemed to hide a huge conspiracy, and I had already been involved. I decided not to sit around and wait for death. I would rely on my own strength to uncover the truth of it all, even if the road ahead was full of danger. Amy and the zombie dresser, their every move would be under my close scrutiny. This crisis-ridden contest had just begun, and I must not lose. Since receiving that mysterious phone call, I have been keeping a closer watch on Amy and the zombie impersonator. On the surface, I pretended to be unaffected and continued living my life as usual, but secretly, every nerve in my body was on edge, keeping a close eye on their every move. A few days later, I discovered that Amy had secretly met the zombie-costumed man again at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. I followed them quietly, my heart both nervous and full of anticipation. I knew that perhaps this time I would uncover the truth. When I arrived at the abandoned warehouse, they were already inside, talking. I approached carefully, hiding in a hidden corner, and listened hard to their conversation with my ears pricked. We can't go on like this anymore. Jack is getting suspicious and he won't let us off the hook easily. Amy's voice was tinged with fear, and her body was trembling slightly. What are you afraid of? What can he do to us? As long as we stick to the plan, there won't be any problems. The voice of the zombie dress-up character was still full of provocation, but I could hear a hint of panic hidden within. Hearing this, I could no longer hold back my anger, and I rushed out. What the hell are you doing? You have to give me an explanation today. Amy and the zombie-costumed person were startled by my sudden appearance, and their expressions instantly froze. The zombie-costumed person reacted quickly blocking Amy's body, a fierce look flashing in his eyes. Jack, don't push it too far. There are some things you're better off not knowing. I've had enough of your cover-ups. If you don't explain yourself clearly today, no one is leaving. I yelled, my voice echoing in the empty warehouse. Amy looked at me, her eyes full of despair. She gritted her teeth and finally said, Jack, actually, it's all about money. It turned out that the zombie-costumed man was a member of an underground gambling organization. Amy had fallen into the quagmire of gambling by chance and owed a huge debt. In order to repay her debt, she had no choice but to obey the zombie dresser's arrangements and participate in this so-called prank, the purpose of which was to lure me into the trap. As I listened to Amy's words, I felt a mixture of emotions in my heart. Anger, disappointment, and pain. I looked at the woman I once loved so deeply, and felt that she was so unfamiliar. Then why didn't you tell me? We could have worked together to find a solution, I asked painfully. I'm afraid that if you find out, you'll leave me, Amy sobbed. Just then, the warehouse door was suddenly broken open, and a group of people dressed in black rushed in, led by the man with a deep voice who had called me. Now that you know, don't blame us for being rude, he sneered. Just as I thought we were in dire straits, I suddenly heard a siren approaching. It turned out that before following Amy and the zombie dresser, I had quietly called the police. Seeing this, the black-clad men panicked and tried to escape, but were quickly subdued by the police who had arrived. Amy and the zombie dress-up were also taken away by the police. I stood still and watched it all, my heart filled with mixed emotions. This farcical drama full of twists and turns was finally over, and I also saw Amy's true colors during this crisis. Although my heart was full of pain, I also understood that this was a new beginning, and I had to regain my life and stay away from all this conspiracy and betrayal.